She said I abandoned them, said I walked away, said I stopped providing. In a courtroom, under oath, I remember the way the word abandoned sounded when it left her mouth. It didn't echo. It just sat there, heavy, ugly, like it belonged to me. The judge looked over his glasses at me. Not angry, not sympathetic either, just waiting. Her lawyer adjusted his tie like he'd already won, and I felt something strange in my chest. Not panic, not even anger, just clarity, because under that courtroom bench, at my feet, was a banker's box. The cardboard kind with the cutout handles. Nothing dramatic about it. No locks. No labels screaming evidence. Just a box. Inside were 847 receipts. Every electric bill. Every mortgage payment. Every grocery run. 12 years of insurance premiums. Soccer cleats. Braces. Christmas mornings. Hospital copays. School lunches. Summer camps. Car repairs. 12 years. 847 pieces of paper. And she said I abandoned them. I didn't stand up right away. I didn't argue. I didn't interrupt her attorney while he spoke about financial negligence and pattern of withdrawal. Pattern of withdrawal. That one almost made me laugh. Instead, I waited. When the judge finally asked if I had anything to say, I bent down, picked up the box, set it gently on the table in front of me. The sound it made wasn't loud, just cardboard meeting wood, but it might as well have been thunder. I opened the lid, and the room changed. You could feel it. Paper doesn't make much noise when you lift it. It whispers. That's what it did. It whispered for 12 years straight. Her lawyer stopped talking mid-sentence. The judge leaned forward, and Sarah, my wife, she didn't look at me. Not once. Folks, Uncle Mickle here. I didn't expect to ever say this out loud. I'm not a man who likes airing family business. I'm old-fashioned that way. You fix things inside the house. You protect the mother of your children even when you're angry. You keep your head down, and you work. That's what I did. Or at least, I thought I did. I'm not perfect. Let me say that early so nobody thinks this is one of those stories where the man paints himself as a saint. I've lost my temper. I've worked too much. I've shut down when I should have talked. But abandoned? No. That word, it's been echoing in my skull ever since. What hurts isn't the accusation. It's that she believed it, or needed to. And that's what I'm still trying to understand. Because that courtroom moment didn't start there. It didn't start with receipts. It started years earlier. Quietly. Subtle shifts. Small things I told myself were normal. I keep replaying it. The dinners that got quieter. The way Sarah stopped asking how my day was. Not out of anger, just disinterest. The way I'd come home exhausted, and she'd already be asleep. Foam glowing on her chest. I thought that was adulthood. I thought that was marriage after kids. You grind. You sacrifice. You get tired together. You don't count receipts. You don't prepare for war. And yet there I was. In a pressed suit I barely wear anymore. Listening to the woman I built a life with tell a judge I had disappeared from my own family. If I hadn't kept those papers, if I hadn't been the kind of man who files things, who keeps proof without knowing why, I don't know what would have happened. That's the part that chills me. Because truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's just paper in a box. And sometimes you don't realize you're being rewritten until someone says it out loud in front of strangers. I remember thinking, as I stood there holding that lid open, how did we get here? Not how did she get here? How did we? And that question, that's the one that still keeps me up at night. Before any courtroom, before the box, before the word abandoned ever touched air. There was just a house with blue shutters and a cracked driveway. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms. Backyard that sloped a little too much to the left. I remember patching that fence myself the first spring we moved in. Took me 2 weekends and more patience than I had at the time. Sarah stood on the porch holding a glass of iced tea, laughing at me because I measured everything twice. Relax, Mick, she'd say. It's a fence, not a spaceship. She used to call me Mick back then. I miss that. We weren't rich. Not even close. I worked logistics for a regional supply company. Long hours. Good benefits. Predictable paycheck. Sarah stayed home when Michael was born, then picked up part-time work at a dental office once Jennifer started kindergarten. We had routines. Friday night pizza. Sunday morning pancakes. I handled the bills because I was better with numbers. Always had been. My dad drilled that into me early. If you don't track it, you don't own it. So I tracked everything. Mortgage auto-drafted on the first. Utilities entered manually. Insurance policies in a file folder labeled with the year. It wasn't obsessive. It was stability. That's what I told myself. There's something calming about knowing the lights will stay on. And for a long time, they did. Sarah handled the heart of the house. The kids' schedules. Doctor appointments. Permission slips. She knew which teacher preferred email and which wanted handwritten notes. She remembered birthdays without reminders. We were a team. At least that's how I saw it. I won't pretend it was perfect. I worked late more than I should have, especially when Michael hit middle school and needed help with math. I told myself overtime meant college funds, security, options. I thought provision was love, and maybe that's where I got it wrong. I didn't notice when her tone shifted. Not at first. It was small. She'd ask, "Do you really need to work Saturday?" And I'd answer with numbers. "We're ahead on the mortgage by 6 months. "That's not what I meant," she'd say. I didn't understand what she meant. Still don't, if I'm honest. There was one night, and I've replayed this one more than most, when Jennifer had a school play. I promised I'd be there. I left work on time. Traffic backed up on Route 9 because of an accident. By the time I got there, the auditorium lights were already up. I saw Sarah in the lobby. She didn't yell, didn't even look mad. She just said, "It's okay." She did great. That calm hurt more than anger would have. Later that night, Jennifer showed me a video Sarah recorded on her phone. I watched my daughter sing while I stood in the kitchen, still wearing my work boots. I remember thinking, I'll make it up next time. There's always a next time, right? That's what men like me believe. Time stretches. Kids grow slow. Marriage can handle strain. It's funny how you don't see the hairline cracks when you're inside the structure. Looking back, I think Sarah felt alone long before she ever said it. But alone doesn't always mean abandoned. There's a difference. One evening, after the kids were asleep, she sat across from me at the dining table. Bills spread between us like usual. She traced her finger along a grocery receipt and said, "Do you ever feel like we're just roommates managing a project?" I laughed. Actually laughed. "Yeah," I said. "The project's called survival." She didn't smile back. I wish I caught that. If you've ever been married a long time, you know how easy it is to slide into function, into task lists, into efficiency. Love becomes logistics, and logistics was my language. I wasn't cold. I hugged my kids every night. I kissed Sarah before work. I texted her when I'd be late. But somewhere along the line, warmth turned into reliability. And reliability, I guess, can look like distance if you're needing something else. I'm not defending myself here. I'm just trying to be honest. Because if I tell this like she was some villain from the start, that'd be a lie. We built that house together. We filled it with noise, with scraped knees and science fair posters and arguments about curfew. And if you'd asked me back then, year 8, year 9, if my marriage was in trouble, I'd have said no. I'd have said we were tired. There's a difference, isn't there? Or maybe that's the first red flag. Thinking tired and drifting are the same thing. I don't know. I'm curious what you would have done if your spouse looked at you and said they felt alone, but didn't ask for anything specific. What do you fix when the problem doesn't have a name? I thought paying the bills early was love. I thought stability was enough. Turns out stability doesn't speak very loud. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't some dramatic explosion. It was smaller than that, quieter. The first real crack showed up in a bank notification. I was at work. Tuesday. Nothing special about it. My phone buzzed during a meeting. Low balance alert on our joint checking. That didn't make sense. Mortgage had cleared the week before. Utilities were steady. I knew the numbers. I always knew the numbers. I didn't panic. I just figured something hit early. That night, after dinner, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. Sarah was in the living room, scrolling on her phone. The TV was on, but nobody was really watching it. I logged in. There were 3 withdrawals I didn't recognize. Same amount. Same vendor name. It wasn't huge money, but it wasn't small either. I stared at the screen longer than I probably needed to. "Hey," I called gently. "Did you sign up for something new?" I'm seeing a charge I don't recognize. She didn't look up right away. Then she said, "Oh, that's probably nothing. I'll check." Probably nothing. That phrase stuck. She didn't come over to look. Didn't ask to see it. Just said she'd check. And I let it go. I don't like conflict. Never have. If something can be solved quietly, I prefer it that way. A few days passed. Another alert. This time it wasn't a charge. It was a transfer. Money moved from savings into checking. That I knew we hadn't discussed. I waited until the kids were asleep. Did something come up? I asked. She sighed. Not defensive. Just tired. I had to cover something. I didn't think it was a big deal. What was it? She hesitated. It's just stuff, Mick. Clothes. A few things for the house. We didn't need clothes. The house didn't need anything urgent. But again, it wasn't catastrophic. It wasn't gambling debt. It wasn't some obvious red flag screaming betrayal. It was just fog. And I hate fog. Because you can't see what you're walking into. I started checking the account more often after that. Not obsessively. Just more aware. The vendor name popped up again. 3 times in 1 month. I searched it. It wasn't a clothing store. It wasn't home decor. It was a consulting service. That's when my stomach tightened. Consulting for what? Sarah didn't run a business. She didn't freelance. I told myself there had to be an explanation. There's always an explanation. Right? That weekend, I asked again. Calm. No accusations. I looked up that company. What is it? She didn't answer right away. She was folding laundry. Methodical. Precise. It's counseling, she said finally. I felt stupid for not thinking of that. Marriage counseling? I asked. She shook her head. Personal. That hit differently. You're seeing someone? I asked. Yes. For how long? She kept folding. A few months. A few months. I did the math in my head. The withdrawals lined up. You didn't tell me. I tried, she said quietly. You were busy. Busy. That word again. I sat down. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was displaced. Like I'd missed a turn somewhere and ended up in a town I didn't recognize. Why didn't we talk about this? I asked. I didn't know how, she said. That answer didn't satisfy me. But it wasn't hostile either. It was distant. That night, I lay awake next to her, listening to her breathing, wondering what she was telling a stranger that she couldn't tell me. And here's the part I'm not proud of. The next morning, I printed the last 6 months of bank statements. Not because I thought she was cheating, not because I thought she was stealing, but because I needed to understand the ground under my feet. There's a difference between trust and blindness. I didn't know which one I'd been practicing. Over the next few weeks, more small discoveries stacked up. Extra cash withdrawals. A credit card I didn't recognize, still in our name. A P.O. box fee. That one made my pulse spike. Why do we have a P.O. box? I asked. Her face changed. Not guilt, but calculation. For privacy, she said. Privacy from who? From you, she replied. That was the first time the air between us turned sharp. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just sat there. Because when someone says they need privacy from their spouse, that's not a logistical issue. That's something else. And I realized, slowly, painfully, I was no longer managing a household. I was managing uncertainty. And I didn't know what was coming next. But I could feel it, like pressure building behind a closed door. The P.O. box bothered me more than the counseling. Counseling meant she was struggling. The P.O. box meant she was preparing. Those are 2 very different things. I didn't confront her again right away. I needed facts before feelings. That's always been my way. Feelings get loud. Facts stay steady. So I waited. 2 weeks later, I took a half day off work. Didn't tell her. Told my supervisor I had a dentist appointment. I drove to the post office listed on the statement. Small place. Beige walls. Fluorescent lighting that makes everything look tired. I stood in line like I belonged there. When it was my turn, I didn't ask for the key. I wasn't on the box registration. I already knew that from checking the account details. Instead, I asked a simple question. Is this box under a joint name? The clerk checked. No, sir. Individual. Individual. I thanked her and walked back to my truck. Sat there for a while. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't furious. I was recalibrating. There's a moment when you realize the story you thought you were in isn't the story anymore. That was mine. That night, I didn't bring it up. I watched her instead. She was lighter lately. That's the strange part. More energized. Dressing differently. New perfume. Nothing inappropriate. Just intentional. And I started connecting dots I didn't want to connect. I checked the credit card account tied to that unknown number. It wasn't hidden well. Same bank. Different login. The statements were paperless. I requested copies. 3 days later, they arrived in the mail. I opened them alone. No dramatic music. No thunder. Just paper. There were legal consultation fees. 2 different law offices. 1 local. 1 an hour away. That's when my chest tightened. I didn't feel betrayed. Not yet. I felt replaced. Like decisions had been made, and I was the last to know. When she came home that evening, I was sitting at the table with the statements stacked neatly in front of me. I need you to explain this, I said. She didn't pretend not to know. She looked at the papers. Then at me. I was going to tell you. When? She didn't answer that. I've been unhappy for a long time, Mick. That sentence didn't shock me. The preparation did. You talk to lawyers before you talk to me? I tried to talk to you, she said again. No anger at her voice. Just conviction. You were never here. That one landed harder than I expected. Because I was there. Physically. Financially. Every night. But emotionally? I don't know. Maybe I thought consistency was enough. Maybe she needed something I never learned how to give. Still. Lawyers. Separate accounts. A P.O. box. That's not confusion. That's an exit strategy. What are you planning? I asked. She inhaled slowly. I'm filing. There it was. Clean. Direct. No yelling. No tears. Just paperwork in motion. I didn't beg. I didn't threaten. I asked one thing. Why does this feel like I'm the enemy? She paused. Because she knew that part was true. I can't survive like this anymore, she said. Survive. That word stung. Because in my mind, I was the one making survival possible. I stood up, walked to the garage, closed the door, and for the first time in years, I let myself feel it. Not rage, not revenge, grief. 12 years of shared space, of small jokes, of children learning to walk between us, and she had been building a case, quietly, methodically, while I was still paying the electric bill 2 days early. I went back inside after I'd steadied myself. We talked logistics, who would tell the kids, how we'd handle the house. Cold conversation, professional, almost respectful. That's what made it worse. Over the next month, formal papers arrived. Allegations included emotional absence. I could have handled that. But then I read the financial claim. Failure to contribute meaningfully to family support. I read that sentence 3 times. Failure to contribute. I thought it had to be a mistake. I paid everything. Everything. I pulled tax returns, bank statements, insurance records. And that's when I started counting. Not obsessively. Not angrily. Just counting. Every payment I had personally made. Every direct withdrawal tied to my income. It wasn't about pride. It was about reality. Because somewhere between counseling sessions and legal consultations, the narrative had shifted. From unhappy marriage to financial abandonment. And that wasn't just a difference of opinion. That was an accusation. And accusations don't just affect reputation. They affect custody. They affect judgment. They affect how your children might one day see you. That's when the grief hardened into something steadier. Not revenge. Not cruelty. Clarity. If this was going to be about truth, then truth was going to be documented. And I was going to be ready. Even if it broke my heart to do it. I didn't hire the most aggressive lawyer in town. I hired the quiet one. David Harper. Mid-50s. Gray at the temples. Didn't promise victories. Didn't insult my wife. Just listened. I appreciated that. When I laid the paperwork in front of him, he skimmed it slowly. No raised eyebrows. No dramatic sighs. She's claiming financial neglect, he said plainly. Yes. Were you the primary earner? Yes. Did you pay the household bills? Yes. Can you prove it? That question didn't offend me. It focused me. I think so, I said. He leaned back. Don't think. No. That's when I started gathering everything. Not in anger. In precision. I requested archived bank records going back 12 years. Most were digital. Some older ones had to be mailed. I paid the retrieval fees, without hesitation. I pulled tax transcripts from the IRS, mortgage amortization schedules, utility payment histories, insurance premium logs, college savings contributions, even the receipts for braces. You'd be surprised what companies can send you when you ask politely and explain you're headed to court. Every evening after work, I sat at the dining room table with a legal pad and a calculator. The kids were still home at that point. We hadn't told them everything yet, just that Mom and Dad were working through some adult decisions. That phrase tastes bitter even now. I didn't want them hearing numbers through walls, so I worked quietly. I created columns: date, vendor, amount, method, source of funds. It wasn't about proving she never spent money. It was about proving I never stopped providing it. There's a difference. Some nights I'd pause and just stare at the paper. Not because it was overwhelming, because it was sobering. You don't realize how many ordinary days make for marriage until you itemize them. April 12th, electric bill. June 3rd, summer camp deposit. October 19th, pediatrician copay. December 22nd, Christmas gifts from Target. Every line was a memory I didn't know I was archiving. Part of me hated that I was doing this. It felt like turning love into accounting. But the alternative? Letting someone rewrite 12 years? I couldn't do that. About 2 weeks into the process, Sarah walked into the kitchen while I was sorting receipts. She stood there for a moment. "You're really going to fight this?" she said. I looked up. "I'm going to correct it." That's all I said. I wasn't trying to punish her. I wasn't trying to win. I just wasn't going to wear a label that wasn't mine. She studied the stacks of paper. "You think money is the only way to show up?" she said. That sentence lingered long after she left the room. Because maybe she was right. Maybe I did equate provision with presence. But that still didn't make her claim accurate. Both things can be true. I can have missed emotional cues and still never abandon my family financially. David reviewed my documentation a week before the hearing. He didn't smile. He didn't congratulate me. He just nodded. "This is thorough," he said. "How thorough?" I asked. He tapped the stack. "Judges respect paper." That was it. No strategy speeches. No revenge plotting. Just preparation. The night before court, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid of losing money. Money can be rebuilt. I was afraid of losing narrative. If a judge believed I had withdrawn support, that would stick. Not just legally, but socially. With my kids. With myself. And here's something I haven't admitted out loud until now. There was a small voice in me that wondered, am I overdoing this? Am I turning something human into something transactional? Is this pride talking? I sat on the edge of my bed at 2 a.m., staring at that box of organized receipts. 847. I counted them twice. Part of me wanted to leave it at home, to just trust that truth would speak for itself. But truth doesn't speak. People do. And sometimes they speak confidently while being wrong. So I taped the lid closed. Wrote the number 847 on the side in black marker. Not for drama, for reference. Because I needed to remember what it represented. Not paper. Not dollars. Effort. Consistency. 12 years of showing up the only way I knew how. The morning of the hearing, I carried that box to my truck. It wasn't heavy. That's the strange part. It felt light. Like the decision had already been made. Not by the judge. By me. I wasn't going into that courtroom to attack Sarah. I was going in to anchor the truth. Cold. Clear. Documented. And whatever happened after that, at least I would know I didn't stay silent. Courtrooms are quieter than people expect. No dramatic music. No gasps. Just shuffling paper. Shoes on tile. Low murmurs that stop when the judge walks in. Sarah sat at the table across from me. Navy blouse. Hair pulled back. Calm. Her lawyer did most of the talking. "Your Honor, my client experienced prolonged financial abandonment." There was that word again. Abandonment. He spoke smoothly. Confident. He referenced irregular contributions and lack of meaningful support. I kept my hands folded. David leaned over once and whispered, "Let him finish." So I did. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Thompson," he said, adjusting his glasses, "would you like to respond?" My throat was dry, but my voice didn't shake. "Yes, Your Honor." I stood, bent down, lifted the box onto the table, set it down carefully. It made that soft cardboard thud. I removed the lid. No speech, no theatrics, just paper. "These are 12 years of documented payments," I said evenly. "Mortgage, utilities, insurance, education, medical, household expenses. 847 receipts." The room didn't explode. It tightened. Her lawyer started to speak, then stopped when I pulled out the first stack. I handed copies to David. He handed them to the clerk. I moved methodically, year by year. I didn't rush, didn't rant, just facts. Every mortgage payment made on time or early. Utilities paid in full. Insurance maintained without lapse. College accounts funded monthly. The judge flipped through pages. Silence stretched. Her attorney cleared his throat. Financial presence does not equal emotional. The judge raised a hand. "We're addressing financial abandonment," he said calmly. That's when her lawyer went quiet. Not defeated, just recalculating. I felt something shift in my chest. Not triumph, relief. Because paper doesn't argue. It just exists. About halfway through presenting the documents, a thought hit me harder than anything said out loud. Was I reducing my marriage to spreadsheets? Was I standing here proving I paid bills while ignoring that she felt alone? For a split second, I questioned myself. Is this what winning looks like? Stacked paper and a colder room? I looked at Sarah. She still wasn't looking at me. And I realized something. This wasn't about proving I was a perfect husband. It was about correcting a specific claim. Nothing more. Nothing less. So I kept going. Short sentences. Clear statements. No emotion layered in. Just reality. David requested the financial allegation be reconsidered in light of documented evidence. The judge reviewed quietly. Minutes felt long. Finally, he looked up. "Based on the documentation provided," he said, "the claim of financial abandonment appears unsupported." Appears unsupported. Not dramatic, not explosive, but decisive. Her lawyer didn't object, didn't argue. He simply nodded once and stopped talking. The air in the room changed again. Not victory, balance. The judge continued discussing custody schedules and asset division, life logistics, normal divorce mechanics. But that one accusation, it dissolved. Just like that. When the hearing adjourned, I packed the receipts back into the box. Slowly, carefully. Not because I needed them anymore, but because they represented something I wasn't ready to discard. As we stood to leave, Sarah finally looked at me. Her expression wasn't anger. It wasn't apology either. It was complicated. "You didn't have to do all that," she said quietly. I met her eyes. "Yes," I replied. "I did." We walked out separately. No dramatic final words. No shouting in the hallway. Just two adults carrying different versions of the same 12 years. And as I placed that box back in my truck, I didn't feel powerful. I felt tired. Because proving something true still costs you. Even when you win that piece of it. Divorce doesn't end when the judge speaks. It just changes shape. After that hearing, the financial accusation was removed from the formal complaint. On paper, it was as if it had never been there. But words don't evaporate that easily. They linger. In hallways. In family group texts. In the quiet moments when your kids look at you and don't quite know what to ask. Michael was old enough to sense tension. 15. Sharp kid. Too observant for his own good. One evening, about a month after court, he stood in the kitchen while I was rinsing dishes. "Dad," he said carefully, "Mom said you guys disagreed about money." I turned off the water. Disagreed about money. That's how it had been reframed. "Your mom and I see some things differently," I answered. He nodded, like he was measuring my words. "You always paid for stuff though, right?" That question, it was small, casual on the surface, but it carried weight. I didn't pull out receipts. I didn't defend myself. I just said, "I always made sure this house ran." He studied my face for a second. Then he said, "Yeah, I know. And that was enough. Jennifer was younger. 12. She didn't ask direct questions. She watched. She noticed when I moved into the spare bedroom before I found an apartment. She noticed when Sarah stopped wearing her wedding ring. Kids don't need explanations as much as they need consistency. So I stayed consistent. Soccer practices, homework help, Sunday breakfasts, even after I moved out. I rented a small 2-bedroom apartment 15 minutes away. Nothing special. Beige carpet, thin walls. But it was clean, stable, predictable. I kept the routines. That mattered more than winning an argument in court. Sarah and I learned how to communicate like co-workers managing a shared project. Pickup times, school events, medical forums. Polite, efficient, guarded. There were moments, usually during exchanges, when our eyes would meet and I'd see something flicker. Regret? Maybe. Or maybe just memory. We didn't rehash the past. We didn't dissect what went wrong. The divorce finalized 6 months later. Assets divided fairly. Custody shared. No dramatic collapse. No financial ruin. Just restructuring. And here's the part people don't talk about. Even when you're vindicated in court, you still grieve the life you thought you were going to finish. I drive past the old house, sometimes on my way home from work. Blue shutters still there. Fence still leaning slightly left. Another family would live there someday. They wouldn't know about the receipts, or the counseling sessions, or the quiet dinners where something was already slipping away. They'd just see a house. I kept a box of receipts, not because I planned to use them again, but because they remind me of something important. Effort counts, even when it isn't enough. I've had time to think about Sarah's words. You think money is the only way to show up. That sentence still stings, because I never believed it was the only way. I just thought it was the most measurable way. You can prove a payment. You can't always prove presence. And maybe I confused the two. That doesn't make her courtroom claim fair. But it does make our marriage more complicated than a villain story. If you're listening to this, and you're married, or building something with someone, ask yourself something uncomfortable. Are you showing up in the way they actually need? Or in the way that feels safest to you? There's a difference. I don't hate Sarah. I don't resent her. I wish things had unfolded differently. I wish counseling had included me sooner. I wish I'd asked better questions when she said she felt alone. But I also don't regret defending the truth. Both can live in the same heart. Life after divorce isn't cinematic. It's grocery lists and custody calendars, and learning how to cook smaller portions. It's quiet apartments. It's rediscovering who you are without the role you held for over a decade. And slowly, very slowly, it's peace. Not the loud kind, the steady kind, the kind that comes from knowing you didn't abandon your responsibilities, even if you missed other things along the way. And that's a harder truth to carry. But it's mine. There's something strange about silence after storm. Not the dramatic kind of storm. I mean the legal one, the emotional one, the kind that rearranges your address and your routines and the way holidays feel. After everything's settled, after the paperwork was stamped and the furniture divided and the kids adjusted to 2 homes. Life didn't feel victorious. It felt honest, quieter than before. I started taking long walks in the evenings. No headphones, just pavement and my own thoughts. I'd replay conversations in my head, not to argue them again, but to understand them. I used to think providing was the backbone of love. Now I think it's just one bone in a much bigger structure. Necessary, but not sufficient. If I'm being real with you, there were nights in that apartment when I sat at the small kitchen table and asked myself a question I didn't like. If she hadn't made that financial claim, would I have ever examined myself this deeply? Would I have just told the story as she was unhappy and left it at that? Maybe. And that's uncomfortable, because sometimes conflict forces clarity we wouldn't volunteer for. I don't regret bringing those 847 receipts. I don't regret standing up calmly and correcting the record. But I also don't pretend that winning that moment fixed everything. It didn't. What it did was protect my name. What it didn't do was rewind time. There's a difference. I see my kids differently now. When Michael talks about a game or a test, I put my phone down completely. When Jennifer wants to show me something small, a drawing, a song she likes, I don't multitask. I used to think being tired was proof I was doing enough. Now I understand tired can also be a warning. You can be exhausted and still missing the point. If you're listening to this and you're in the thick of providing, working long hours, paying every bill, making sure the roof doesn't leak, I respect that. That matters. But let me ask you something gently. When the paperwork is perfect and the accounts are balanced, who are you emotionally? Are you present? Or just responsible? That's not an accusation. It's a question I had to learn the hard way. Sarah and I aren't enemies. We're two people who built something, lost something, and are now trying to co-parent with dignity. I don't tell this story to embarrass her. I tell it because sometimes the loudest accusations aren't about facts. They're about pain. And if you don't separate the two carefully, you can lose yourself trying to defend one while ignoring the other. I defended the facts. Now I work on understanding the pain. Both matter. If there's any wisdom in all this, it's simple and maybe a little unpolished. Keep your receipts, but also keep your conversations. Track your payments, but track your presence too. Because one day, someone might question what you contributed, and you'll want to know, not just legally, but personally, that you showed up in more than one way. I still have that box. It's in the back of my closet now. Not as a weapon, not as a trophy, just as a reminder. Truth doesn't shout. It waits to be documented. And relationships, they don't collapse in a single moment. They erode in the spaces we assume are secure. If you've made mistakes, own them. If you've been misrepresented, stand up calmly. And if you're still building something with someone, don't wait for a courtroom to evaluate your contribution. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Uncle Mickle's voice travels. Show up in ways that can't be itemized.